Making sense of a country's political landscape in our world today is a lesson in the aversion to diversity. So explains Redeemer Associate Professor Robert Joustra, who tells Context executive producer Susan Ponting why white evangelical voters in the U.S. make up a huge number and why their votes are generational.
Great to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Nice, good, yep.
Oh, sit here.
Fascinating. Part of the story is that, well, actually, white evangelicals have been Republican for generations at this point, and it's only recently that they've sort of nudged up a little bit more in the context of President Trump. So it's not this huge blowout that 81% makes it look like, oh my goodness, you know, it used to be 20% and then suddenly Donald Trump was the president and 81% of white evangelicals. No, it's a marginal increase, so that's the story in a way. How are we figuring out what's happening? But it's not quite the sweeping narrative that you get when you hear big numbers like 81%.
Dare I go to the Electoral College? As crazily divided the United States is anything but united, is it, as the media reports?
These divisions are actually not new. They actually want to talk about rancorous, divisive, destructive politics. This is not something that this generation has invented. In fact, you go back to some of the early days of the American Republic, even you go back to elections in Upper and Lower Canada, here north of the border. You had thuggery, you had intimidation, you had people paying bar tabs so that they could get the, you know, the right candidate to be voted, right? All the kind of stuff that, you know, if we sent in inspectors today, you know, go to an election in Belarus, say, or something, and say,
right.
well, that's not right. That's electoral mismanagement or something. We had all this stuff, right? It's a pretty consistent theme in our history, and if we're missing it, it's because we've actually whitewashed our history. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is one of the things that, you know, is being called forward, especially by movements like Black Lives Matter and other kinds of social justice movements. They've been drawing our attention to the fact that, you know, if a black man is beaten by a police officer and nobody's there to see it, does it still happen? Well, yes, it does. It just so happens that for the last 50 or 60 years, or several hundred years, we haven't been seeing it, and now we are. So are those divisions new? I don't think those divisions are new. I think they've always been there, but for the first time, we're aware of them on a mass level, and it's causing us to confront our past together. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing. I think that is a confrontation that's overdue. And it's not entirely clear how we will move forward together on some of these things. And I think it's important not to rush past it too fast and say, oh, okay, well, that was some pretty dark stuff. But let's kind of box that away. Let's stuff it to our toes and get back to business as usual. No, I mean, I do think it's good to sit with these moments. And I also think it's important to emphasize that there are factors other than just sort of media exposure that are pushing us to this. The pandemic has exposed a kind of socioeconomic gap and inequality that has been a trademark of both the nationalist and populist campaigns, not just in the United States, but you could go to Brazil, you can go to Hungary, you can go to Russia, you can go to Brexit, right? You can look at the resurgence of Hindu nationalism, with Modi and the BJP in India. You can look at Xi Jinping and what's happening in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, and you wonder, how are we managing diversity, right? And the answer is, as a globe, we have an awful lot of hard questions. So I want to kind of, I don't want to put it too hard on the face of the Americans. Yes, they've got some tough things to deal with.
Right.
Yes, but they're not alone. This is a global event that's sort of sweeping through. How will we manage diversity, and can we find peace in the midst of it?
I know nothing about QAnon.
I just told you.
I know very little. You told me, but what you tell me doesn't necessarily make it fact.
You guys try to make us believe crazy stuff.
No, but do you believe that there are Democrats and celebrities who are in a pedophile ring?
Well, yes.
You do believe?
I do. Yes, I do.
What do you make of it and the conspiracy theories surrounding
QAnon? Oh, I've been reading everything I can about QAnon lately. It's I mean, I love conspiracy theories. In fact, my wife has said that I am no longer allowed to study more of these, because she said you're going to get sucked into these things.
You go down the rabbit hole.
I do. I go so down the rabbit hole. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, it's incredibly disturbing because of, I mean, how it motivates and warps people into kinds of not only behaviors but also outlooks on things.
The white supremacists That's like a movement that goes underground and then
Yep.
comes back and goes underground.
Well, this is the important thing to point out, right? And people are now saying this because, people are seeing these marches at Charlottesville and these white supremacists and saying, where do these white supremacists come from? As though they popped out of the ground overnight. We had no white supremacists in the United States until that riot, and then they, magically appeared. Obviously, that's not true. I mean, what we're finding, and this is what is being put in our faces, as it were, is that these things have always existed. In English Canada, in some ways, we have the diversity as our strength, which is a wonderful motto on some level, but then we don't have the ability to face up to the fact that we actually don't treat each other like diversity is our strength. We actually still do have quite a lot of racism. At least I think in Quebec they actually are able to say, oh yeah, we have these divisions and this is how we're going to deal with them. Here we say these divisions are our strength. And maybe they are, but are they really if we can't even talk to each other about them?
Right.
Then I don't know. Then it starts to look a lot like a weakness. I mean, I think the thing that gets in the way, and actually the historian Herbert Butterfield, I think, put this the best. He said, the thing that's in the way is fear. There are these organized systems of self-righteousness that have sort of convinced themselves of these mortal threats that exist. And that's on both, the Democratic and Republican, I see in their primaries and in their literature, not to morally equivocate them, but just to say that you see these systems that show us there are these things to be afraid of, and we are afraid. And this is where I think the Christian message is so important for people of faith. Time and again, when people encounter the living God and they are overwhelmed with him in the scriptures, the very first word that God says is, do not be afraid.